It is Easter Monday on like I said, it's Monday, April 21st, 2025, which of course is Easter Monday. And of course, there is a lot of news coming down on the world stage, including the death of Pope Francis. So Pope Francis has died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. As a matter of fact, Italian soccer paused as Pope Francis passed away, and all along those lines. And the canonization of the first millennial saint was postponed after Pope Francis's death. So the Vatican postponed Carlo Acutis canonization following the Pope's death, and all in that kind of way. And I also understand that I believe it was on yesterday, the Pope had actually met with J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, and all into that space. I think he had some critical words to say in his meeting and all in that kind of way before he had actually passed away on the day after. But yeah, I think he had some critical words on migration and some other world issues that were going on in the space and all in that way. So we'll see what folks have to say about this sad day for the Catholic Church as they'll try to figure out what their next steps will be and what else they'll be doing in that regards in terms of picking a new pope, since that is what they do. They have a selection of a pope after one passes, and then they get a new one. And there had been speculations about whether they would go for another pope from a Latin background, or whether they go from a pope from an African country, whether they go from a pope from different other lifestyles and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see who is picked next and whether they come from the conservative wing of the Catholic Church or the more liberal or moderate wing, or what goes on in that space. Trump is said to be targeting Harvard Health Research and threat to cut further $1 billion in fund. So definitely looks like he is plotting a major escalation in his feud against Harvard. So definitely amid the ongoing confrontation, the Trump administration is demanding that Harvard's anti-Semitism report. And House Democrats landed in El Salvador and demand Abrego Garcia's return. So four House Democrats traveled to El Salvador to push for Kilmore Abrego Garcia's release. So they landed in El Salvador earlier today, and we'll see how their negotiations go as well. And Pete Hedges is said to have shared the Yemen attack details in second signal chat report says. He's said to have shared those attack details. I understand it was sharing them with family members and all along that line. And this is in Politico. They're saying this is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you. And Levitt says Trump still backs Hedges. And Hedges apparently shared detailed military plans in second signal chat that included his wife and brother. So, like I said, there were some family members in that whole thing. And Supreme Court Justice Alito criticizes the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to hastily block deportation. So the Supreme Court has temporarily blocked new deportations under the 18th century wartime law. So Venezuelan migrants whose deportation was blocked by SCOTUS spoke out on ABC, and I might have to go back there and watch that and see what they were saying in regards to that. So that's still a lot going on in that space. And like I said, J.D. Vance was among the last visitors to Pope Francis after a series of public fallouts. So Vance meets Pope Francis after the pontiff's public criticism of Trump's immigration policies. And J.D. Vance earlier today said, "My heart goes out to Catholics after the Pope's death." And I believe that J.D. Vance is a person that came to Catholicism late in life, but he does think that is part of his faith journey and all along those lines. And Helene hit farmers, that includes some of that here in North Carolina, actually quite a few in North Carolina, are still scrounging for recovery funds 6 months on. So 6 months after Helene, these farmers are still looking for some of the recovery money that they need in order to move back on in their farm endeavors and all in that space. And Vance and Modi are set to meet in India with Trump's tariffs expected to take center stage. So the U.S. Vice President is to meet Modi in New Delhi amid those tariff tensions. So we'll see how that goes as well. So it looks like J.D. Vance is doing a lot of diplomatic work these last couple of weeks and all along those lines. And Beijing warns countries against colluding with the U.S. to restrict trade with China, and China is vowing retaliation against countries that follow the U.S. calls to isolate Beijing. So definitely, they're warning countries not to team up against it to gain Trump's tariff reprieve. So that is something else that we're seeing as well. And drones pose an increasing risk to airliners near major U.S. airports. So there is some concern about drones and their impact on regular airplanes and all along that way. So we'll see how that plays as well. And tornado producing storm deals deadly weather to Oklahoma and Texas. At least 3 are dead as storms hit Oklahoma, Texas, and Missouri. A deadly weekend storm system threatens more tornadoes and flooding rains for part of the U.S. So we'll see what goes on in that space. And El Salvador offers Venezuela prisoner swap involving U.S. deportees. So Bukele, the leader of El Salvador, is proposing a deal that would free deported Venezuelans. So El Salvador president is offering Maduro U.S. deported Venezuelans for prisoner swap. So we'll see how this all goes and whether folks like this trade or not. And Trump is defending Obamacare at the Supreme Court. A win could boost RFK Jr.'s influence. So Obamacare returns to the Supreme Court of the United States with preventive care on the line. So Houston right-wing activist lawsuit puts preventative health care at risk. So we'll see what goes on in that ways. And there were several anti-Trump protesters rallying in cities and towns across the country. I believe there were some of those rallies in Raleigh and Durham over the weekend and everything like that. So it looks like anti-Trump demonstrations swept across the U.S. over the weekend. And deported illegal alien and suspected MS-13 gang member has been transferred from the notorious El Salvadorian mega prison. So Senator Chris Van Hollen argues Trump administration's actions in Abrego Garcia's case. I think he was not exactly pleased with that and everything like that. So it looks like Kilmore Abrego Garcia has been moved to a different El Salvador prison with bed and furniture. So we'll see that goes on in that and if he actually gets released in the not too distant future. International students are being told by email that their visas are revoked and that they must self-deport. So Trump order, according to the BBC, is causing Irish students to rethink studying in the United States. So even some students from Ireland are thinking about not studying in the United States. So in one article in CBS News says an international student has his visa revoked just days after getting a new job and work permit. It just feels like you're less welcome in this country. And following a mass shooting that took place over last weekend and everything, FSU students given options not to return for final weeks of classes. So a security gap at Florida State University heightened students' fears, even with the speedy police response. So they are saying that the shooting victims are expected to fully recover, and Florida State relents on Monday return to campus after outcry, but they are saying that they are giving some of those students the option to not return for that final week of classes. And San Jose is considering arresting homeless people who refuse housing. So if you're refusing housing, they're going to have the right to arrest you. And Moscow may gain key role in Iran nuclear deal as U.S. talks progress. So that is something else going on in the news as well. And Trump aides solicit ideas to raise birth rate from baby bonuses to fertility planning. So there are economists having an article saying, make babies great again. So there is even a woman in Salt Lake who thinks that the world needs more babies. And apparently there are many threats to humanity. A low birth rate isn't one of them, is what is said in Home and Current Affairs. But we'll see what folks think about this notion of trying to get the world to increase the amount of babies in the world. I know Rick Rosner has talked about that a couple of times, even here on this network, the notion that we don't have enough people trying to make babies in the world and all along those lines. So we'll see what folks have to say about a number of these stories, including the continuing war in Ukraine and in Israel and all in that space. So there's a lot going on in there, and we'll see what folks have to say about that as well. So like I said, there's a number of things going on in the world. I'll see what my cohort and the boss here on the network has to say about a number of these things. And hopefully some people will join us later on as well. But there's a lot going on in the world, and we'll see what Nick's got to say about these things. And maybe he's even got a report from Spain as to what they're doing over there in Spain and all in that kind of way. So what's going on in your world? I might get to some other news stories as well, but I know a lot of the news is centering around the death of Pope Francis. And of course, after a Pope passes, then you've got to figure out who's going to be next in leadership in that particular denomination or religion, the Catholic Church, and all along those lines. And apparently he had some harsh words again for J.D. Vance on the eve of his death. So I think those words were said in their meeting on yesterday and all along those lines. So what is your take on what's going on in the world and even what's going on with the Catholic Church as they are preparing to figure out who their next leader will be? It might even be somebody from one of the African nations.
Or maybe even Asian. Remember, there's how many billions and billions of Asians there are out there, Mark? But the Catholic Church is starting to get a little more progressive, reaching into Latin America. Or Pope used to be Italian, and that was it. Then they started expanding German, Latin American. Who knows what they're going to do next? But it remains to be seen. Meantime, Spain is shut down today. But do you know why it's shut down?
Is it shut down because of the Pope?
It's Easter Monday.
Okay.
And Spain is a very Catholic country. And so on Monday, I went downstairs and nobody is there. They're all taking the day off because it's Easter Monday. So
and a lot of people take off Easter Monday. Yeah, a lot of people take off Easter Monday here in the United States as well. I want to say the banks are closed and some other things are closed as well. So it is seen as a holiday. I know that the cultural center I work at, we took today off, and haven't seen a lot of papers in the grading company either. So I'm thinking they must have taken the day off as well. So Easter Monday is a traditional day off for a lot of folks. I do know mass transit is running and other things are running, but it is seen as a day off for a lot of folks, even here in the United States, even in places that aren't necessarily heavily Catholic. This is more of the Bible Belt and more heavily Christian than it is heavily Catholic, but they do oftentimes take off Easter Monday for their other reasons, and definitely Easter is more associated with the Christian holidays and the Christian religion anyway. But yeah, they do take off. I'm pretty sure the banks are closed. I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure they're closed. But I know I was talking to a friend earlier today, and they were like, "It's a holiday." I'm like, "Yeah, Easter Monday is a holiday."
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks is the issue relating to deportation. I understand what Trump's trying to do, but the way he goes about doing it may have violated a lot of the constitutional laws, due process, wrongful detainer, notice and opportunity to be heard. I mean, you just go on and on, litany. And they have a U.S. citizen who's right now being wrongfully detained in El Salvador. And it doesn't matter what the accusations are, because the thing is, I've seen some people, well, he's been accused of a member of M13. First of all, if he was accused as a member of M13, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's guilty, of anything. Exactly. Not only that, he still has notice and opportunity to be heard about the case. You just can't say, oh, you're a member of XYZ, so now we're going to deport you. Our system doesn't work that way. We're a nation of laws. Laws, I say, not nation of somebody making an accusation, and then all of a sudden the person who makes the accusation is considered correct. So we're going to see a lot of problems this administration is going to have in their whole deportation policy. Again, the devil's in the details, the devil's in execution, but it doesn't look like they're executing very well when it comes to the immigration issues.
You're going to have some people talking about that on Tuesday, if I remember correctly, because on the Lawyer's Den, you have an episode where you're going to have some people actually asking the nature of this and whether it is something that can be maintained or whether he's going to have to back off on some of these rules that he set up and everything like that.
Well, yeah, that's what we're going to discuss tomorrow on Lawyer's Den, when it deals with the tariffs. We actually have the attorney who brought the suit in the U.S. International Trade Court regarding tariffs. And this is a very interesting suit. It deals with whether or not the executive branch has the power to move tariffs around like pieces on a chessboard. I think that issue is going to go in front of the Supreme Court, and I'm not sure yet how they're going to rule on this one. This is it's a toss-up but they're going to have to rule. Because when I was looking at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it looks like the powers are in Congress. In other words, it's not in the executive branch to make decisions relating to tariffs. So I don't know how you're going to say that you can make these decisions, except the Supreme Court may say, well, Congress impliedly gave them the power because they didn't act. But I'm not sure if that's a strong argument either. So this is going to be a very interesting case. Now, if the Supreme Court puts the hammer down and says, you don't have the power to make tariffs, that's up to Congress, then we're going to, it'll be the biggest case since Roe versus Wade being overturned, if not bigger, because of everybody, in the United States and around the world. So this is a huge suit. We're going to be discussing it tomorrow at 6:00 on Lawyers Den with the lead attorney who drafted the complaint. And, I haven't seen the response yet what the administration is going to say. But we're going to see two big cases, one revolving around this and the other revolving about deportation. I think that's
well, there's some interesting news that came out of Europe, and apparently along those lines. And I wish Sasha was here because I'm sure he's not pleased about this notion. But the Kremlin said that it is happy about some of the things that are going on in the space of the administration's thoughts around the Ukraine-Russia war and all along those lines. So the Kremlin said on Monday that the position of U.S. President Donald Trump's administration on ruling out NATO membership for Ukraine gave Moscow satisfaction, but declined to comment on Trump's hope for a peace deal this week. So apparently Trump, seeking to be remembered as a peacemaker, has repeatedly said he wanted to end the bloodbath of the 3-year conflict in Ukraine, which his administration cast as a proxy war between the United States and Russia. So definitely U.S. Envoy General Keith Kellogg said on Monday that NATO alliance membership was off the table for Ukraine, and Trump had said past U.S. support for that was the cause of the war. And apparently the Russian ruble is rising on hopes for peace. So maybe they're getting ready to spend more money since they are having their money value rise on this hope and notion of peace and everything. So any thoughts around this? I know Sasha says the war will not end until Ukraine has had victory and everything like that. But what is your thoughts on this notion and whether we're going to see a peace settlement of some sort or another?
Ukraine having victory. How are they going to have victory? You have one of the largest nuclear powers in the world on the other side of the table. I don't see where this is going to be a victory. I think you have a real problem here, and both sides are losing. So if you want to know who's losing the war, I'll tell you who's losing the war. Ukraine's losing the war, and Russia's losing the war. They're both losing, and the reason they're losing is they're losing economically. You're losing people. They're losing structure. It's just this is a loser's game. So you got Ukraine losing and Russia losing. The longer they continue, the more they're going to lose. Neither one's going to win this, Mark. The only question is how much are they going to lose? It's almost like I tell people litigation. You're going to lose. The only question is how much. So all you're trying to do is mitigate your losses. But when I saw the initial terms of Russia, we want you to disarm, lay down all your arms. That's kind of ridiculous, That's not going to happen because Russia has a tendency to come in and just destroy everything. So, the laying down of your arms is not a negotiation point. It just, as I say in Pawn Stars, that ain't happening.
Well, speaking of things that aren't happening, go ahead.
I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the thing is, this thing may continue on another 3 years, maybe gone next week. Who knows?
It might be. That's very true.
Yeah, but I'll tell you this:
things that have been going on.
It's a loser. Both sides have already lost the war. Now the question is how long they want to continue losing the war. I don't see too many winners in any war. They say, "Oh, well,
that's what I was going to ask you about another war that's been going on forever." Because apparently the South Sudan military, and that is a part of the country that has been marked by Trump, and that's creating a problem for Duke University and one of their star athletes. But the South Sudan's military recaptured a key town from the White Army militia, and it says that it has captured that town and all along those lines. So it looks like that war has been going on almost as long, if not longer, than the war there in Russia. And Ukraine doesn't get as much coverage, but it's one of them cases, like you said, that who will win in this continuing war? And there's probably nobody that's going to win.
No, the Sudanese are both losers. The only question is who's going to lose the most. That's it. That's what war is about. It's a game of losers, and the only question is who's going to lose more. And the other person loses less, but no one wins. That's kind of like insane. So I don't see that being a winner's game for sure. I think it's a loser's game. The only question is who loses.
Well, Uganda apparently is in the news as well, and they have an idea that maybe Trump might borrow from, because apparently Uganda is planning a law to allow the military prosecution of civilians. So not just prosecution, but military prosecution of civilians, and all in that way. And I know another major country in Africa is Nigeria, and apparently a death toll in Nigeria attacks by herders has risen to 56. So apparently they're having some war conflicts in there, and even in Tunisia, they've handed a lengthy prison term to opposition leaders on conspiracy charges, and all in that kind of way. And of course, they've still got the conflict in the Congo, because they said at least 148 people died after a boat catches fire in the Congo. And then Rwanda is to allow Southern African troops in Congo passage to Tanzania, diplomatic sources say. So there are some people that are going to go into that space as well. And hey, this is one that I think Shaquille might be interested in. South Africa investors are facing global growth threat after choppy politics. So I guess they're trying to figure out what they're going to investigate and how they're going to, invest in, what they're going to invest in, particularly with all this stuff around the tariffs. And that was actually something that was reported yesterday, how they are facing a global growth threat after the choppy politics of the world and the choppy politics of South Africa. So it'll be interesting, because it's definitely impacting people's investments. I'm thinking that some people are even finding unique ways to deal with the tariffs. Matter of fact, I saw a commercial on yesterday. I think it was for Rooms to Go, and they basically said that their prices were locked in, I think, till the end of the month. So basically, they were trying to encourage people to buy products. And I'm sure that as a furniture company, they get products both from the U.S. and around the world, but to buy them in this next week, because if you buy them in the next week, the prices will be locked. They're not going to let the prices go up or down. And that was kind of like their advertising strategy, which I thought was an interesting strategy in that sense. And we do have Shaquille joining us right now, along with—
I was going to say, you spoke his name in vain, Mark. When you say his name, Shaquille, all of a sudden—
That's right. I hear my name being mentioned, so I thought I better join before Jatovi gets to say anything.
Well, apparently Australia is getting into some sort of tiff with China right now. At least that's what our news said.
Yeah, that's what our news said. But what I was talking about was investment. I'm sorry, Shaquille. What I was talking about was investment, and I noticed that recent market jitters have sent the rand to near record lows, and apparently investors have flocked to South Africa's domestic bond market, betting the country can stay the course on reforms despite political fractures. But those tariff threats and the prospect of a global growth slowdown are casting a long shadow. But that's more your lane in terms of foreign investment and investment in Africa in general.
He trades currencies. I don't know how you trade currencies right now, because I'm just sticking with the dollar, watching the dollar go down the toilet versus the euro, and things are going to be more expensive for me. I'm not really happy with that. I was happy I exchanged a lot of money over to the euros in the last couple of months, but I still make money in the United States, then transport it over here. It's like,
So what is your take on that, Shaquille? Because it even says in the article I was reading from Reuters that we see the weaker U.S. dollar as the only meaningful tailwind for local assets, thinking about the rand there in South Africa and everything like that. So are we going to see more people that are thinking the U.S. dollar is weak, and therefore they're going to try to invest in other things in terms of their currencies? And also, how is that going to impact the whole notion of global trade in general? And like I said, that's more of your bailiwick than it is mine and everything. So what is your take on what's going on in that space?
Well, first of all, I just want to give my condolences to our Catholic friends and Christians all over the world on the passing of the Pope. that's pretty tragic timing, really, for that to happen over the Easter weekend. So it'll be interesting to see who they appoint as the next pope. I know there's lots of questions about the ethnicity of the new pope and whether that person will be on the more conservative side of the Catholic Church, or perhaps a bit more liberal. Obviously, this pope has been criticised a little bit for being too liberal, so it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that. In relation to Australia and China, I think Australia's in a bit of a difficult position because China and obviously when the United States has a trade war with the rest of the world, but especially with China, that's going to have effect on other economies. And Australia is obviously a very close ally of the United States. However, the amount of trade we do with the US, we also do significant trade with China, and the increase of Chinese demand on Australian minerals and Australian goods is obviously positive for our economy. What's very interesting at the moment is that we're about to have an election. So we've got an election coming up in just over about 10 days or a couple of weeks. So I think early voting has already started. So that'll be very interesting because obviously you've got two, opposition parties that are trying to deal with this. You've got the Labor Party, which it's not quite the equivalent, but just to put it in American terms, the Labor Party is basically the Democrats. You've got the Liberal Party, which is basically the Republicans. But they haven't sort of gone as far right, or they certainly haven't gone down the Trumpian path. And what that's done is it's fractured the right-wing vote into minor parties over here. So how Australia would navigate that'll be very interesting. As for the South African rand falling, look, you're beginning to see a little bit of a decrease in the value of the US dollar. Now, theoretically, that can actually be a good thing if the US is exporting, because it means that, relatively speaking, US exports become cheaper. It's obviously not a very good thing for the US dollar if you're importing things, or if you're somebody like Nick who's traveling all over the world. But the US dollar has been relatively high for a reasonable length of time now, and especially it had some buoyancy during COVID, and obviously it went up significantly against the euro when the war between Russia and Ukraine started. So this is something I've been talking about for years, that eventually you'd start to see money come out of the United States and be invested in other markets. So with the South African rand falling, look, there is some political instability in South Africa. I think that they'll get through that. When they do, it'll improve things. But again, a weaker currency is not necessarily a bad thing. And so South Africa having a cheaper rand can actually make its exports a bit more attractive. And they do have a lot of things that back their economy. Very similar to Australia and Canada, they are actually a very mineral-rich country. And prior to this sort of instability, they are part of the Commonwealth. They are, a sort of first port of call into Africa for a lot of countries. So be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, Shaquille and Jacoby, you're going to get a kick out of this, as will Nick, if he's still back there and everything along those lines. Because I guess for years I've always thought that Chipotle was a Mexican company because it's got Mexican in the title and everything. But apparently they're expanding internationally with several locations coming out, including some in Kuwait. And apparently they're going into Mexico. So apparently maybe they weren't originally a Mexican company, even though they've got Mexico in their name. It is Chipotle Mexican Grill and everything, but it says they're expanding internationally with a location in Mexico that is set to open up early next year. And it said on Monday it's bringing its tacos and burritos to the people in the region for the first time. So it looks like they are entering an area that many folks, including myself, were assuming that they were already in, since it's got it in the name and all along those lines. But yeah, it looks like they're expanding into the Mexican area, as well as expanding into Kuwait and the UAE and everything like that. So I guess I just learned something new. Apparently it was only strictly an American company.
I thought there was already a Chipotle in Dubai. I could be wrong, but I thought there was already one over there. I'm not sure about Kuwait. But it's like Outback, or whatever it's called in America. It's called Outback, the Australian restaurant. I don't think we actually had one here until fairly recently. It was something that we and sort of exported to you guys. But I will make note, it's a pity that Sasha's not here, that the Canadian health authorities, we have a spread over here called Vegemite. Now, Americans tend not to like it very much because you guys tend to put too much on, and it can be quite bitter. It's a black tar-looking thing. It's an Australian staple, so I think all Australians love it, and everybody else in the world hates it. And there was one place in Canada that was selling it, and there was a rule change by the health department in Canada that where they basically banned it. And as of a couple of days ago, being handed a bottle of it, jar of it. As of a couple of days ago, I think Vegemite is now allowed again. But anyway, I will when I come over to the United States, I'll bring some good old Australian Vegemite for you guys, and just to give you an idea of the colour. That's what it looks like.
The color of what it tastes like. We'll get a chance to check on that. There are two issues that we talk about regularly, and everything that will be interesting to see folks thoughts about them. One involves the First Nation people and all along those, but the other one involves migration, because I did see that apparently their migration issue isn't just an issue here as well, but it looks like it's an issue in Canada as well, because it looks like there's even some talk about Canada changing some of their rules and making it harder for migrants to deal. It says some migrants in Canada are losing work status while applications are languishing. And I know that we've definitely, Sasha, if he was here, is definitely in Canada. We've got some other Canadians, including Milan, that come in on his regular economic show and everything like that.
Canada's coming up for an election at the moment as well. Or if they just, no, they haven't had it yet. They're coming up shortly for an election. Look, I think migration has been a big issue around the world, and I think that's why, you'll hear so many comments about American migration policies, opinions of that from people from outside of the United States, because I think many of us are dealing with similar issues. Look, I'm not against immigration. I think that immigration should be encouraged, but I think it needs to be handled the right way. And I think that the majority of people, when they were polled, were not happy about the amount of migration that was happening across the southern border and the way that it was occurring in the United States. What we've seen in Canada is a lot of complaints about the amount of migration that's happened over the last handful of years. One of the complaints they've got over there is that the migrants are pushing up property prices and making it unaffordable for young Canadians to get into the market. That's pretty much the same complaint that we're having here in Australia. And I think in Europe and the United Kingdom especially, you're hearing a lot of comments about migrants who are not assimilating into the existing culture and changing things too dramatically, or committing crimes, or those sorts of things. Now, look, I'll the first to admit that right-wing media can exaggerate those things quite dramatically and amplify them. I think left-wing media can be a little bit dismissive. I'm sure that Jacoby's going to want to say something about this, but look, I think that Western countries need to get a handle on how they want migrants to come in. And I note that you made the comments before I came on about an Irish student not wanting to, or some Irish students not wanting to study in the United States and things like that. Look, from my personal perspective, I think the United States appears, certainly for me, appears to still be very open to immigrants, especially business people that want to open up businesses over there. But yes, reputation matters. And I think that if you become, or if you allow the reputation to depict you as being a country that just doesn't want anybody, that can be quite harmful. So, perhaps Trump's pushed a little bit too far. I don't know. Unlike a councillor over there, Nick, who's decided to disappear into the background, I don't think that any due process things were broken in relation to this guy, this alleged MS-13 person who's been deported, because he was actually adjudicated as an MS-13 member, and he actually had a deportation order. Now, that's what Jacoby is shaking his head, and Jacoby, if you have other information, fair enough. That's what we've been told in our media over here. So, look, again, I'm not in America, so maybe I've got those facts wrong. But what we've been told over here on our media is that this person was, in fact, adjudicated as an MS-13 member, was an illegal immigrant in the first place and actually had a deportation order in place. So, again, I think just from my perspective, whether it be true or not, I think Democrats are kind of got to be a little bit careful, especially with the 27% approval rating in Congress, as to what hills they want to die on. And this just doesn't seem like the right person for you to want to back. You got the governor of Maryland or whatever it was that flies down there. Like, hang on a second. If you want to engage the people, this has been a controversial issue in the last election. Perhaps you want to pick a better person than somebody who's allegedly an MS-13 member.
Jacoby?
We can't hear you, Jacoby. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. I don't know if you maybe have something plugged in or Bluetooth or something.
Yeah, because you're not.
Yeah, we can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Don't hear you at all.
It's the first time ever, right? I can sit here and just take swings at Jacoby and we can't hear him respond. It's brilliant. Maybe you should reset, Jacoby. I'm not sure because we can't hear a thing.
No, I just had my microphone accidentally muted.
There you go. I gotcha.
So just to point out, one, in 2019, what you're talking about is what happened in 2019. He was not adjudicated as an MS-13 member. They had brought that in, but it was flimsy material because they said that he was arrested with some members, but could not be charged as an MS-13 member due to the fact that, well, he could not be seen as an MS-13 member because all they had as proof was that he had a tattoo and he had a hoodie. They had no proof that he was an MS-13 member.
And a Chicago Bulls baseball cap.
Yeah, so, and that's what they've used for some of the other deportations of individuals, is that they've said, okay, well, these tattoos are what's telling that they're a gang member, but they're not. There was one guy who had a tattoo celebrating his mother, and they sent him out saying that was a gang member sign, but it's not. But no, he's not an MS-13 member. There's been no actual proof that he's an MS-13 member. Matter of fact, after 2019, when he went to court, he's actually been going every year after because he has to do a check-in. There was no, the deportation wasn't put out. It was a stay that was put out. So therefore also he could not be deported to El Salvador. And then on top of that, he has not had his day in court. So when these claims of MS-13 never been proven in court, he's committed crimes, never been proven in court. So there is no due process that has happened to this individual. And then when we talk about dying on the hill for this person or that person, Andrew, the Tate brothers, the full force of the government was put forward to bring back the Tate brothers. So there is no excuse about, oh, well, this is a bad person because you bring back the Tate brothers.
They were citizens, right? They're American citizens.
No, hold on. You cannot complain that he's a bad person. But
no, I didn't say he was a bad person. But the comparison you're making, you're comparing to somebody who is an American citizen.
Listen, please. I get the American citizen, and you skip over the bad person who the Tate brothers are, but you skip over the.
No, I'm not skipping over it. No, I'm not skipping over it. They're American citizens.
Shaq, I let you finish.
They're American citizens, right? They could be serial killers. They're still American citizens.
Shaq, are you going to let me finish, or are you just going to talk over me? I let you finish. I sat there quietly and let you finish.
You couldn't speak. Your microphone was muted, Toby.
No, Shaq, I did not speak at all. And the time when I got a chance to speak, that was when we noticed the microphone was muted. So please sit back, relax. I let you go. Please allow me to go. So what I'm saying is, when you go to the point of, well, this is a bad person, you can't do that. You skip over the Tate brothers saying, well, it's American citizen, so you gotta. But this individual, according to our laws, the Constitution says it so. Anybody in the nation is deserved due process. And that's the actual hill that's being died on right now, is the fact that if he is a bad person, prove it in court. If he does whatever, prove it in court. So it's that due process that's the hill that's being died on, not the fact of whoever or whatever this gentleman did. So that's the point of the whole argument. And that's where the Democrats are trying to fight. But again, we get tied up in these silly arguments of, oh, well, the Tate brothers were citizens. But you want to talk about how bad this person is, but forget about the due process of this person. So again, it's all about due process. If you believe that nobody deserves due process and that people that are bad don't deserve it at all, that's your argument. But I'm going constitution-wise. Nick,
that is, that is deliberate.
Chat, we've spoken for a moment, and now we have Nick here. Nick,
I'm sorry, you're not in charge. No, you're not in charge of the network. Nick's more than capable of jumping in when he wants to.
I know, but we're going to allow him to jump in because we have talked.
No, I'm going to respond to you, actually.
I don't need your response because you're going to argue about.
But I'm sure our audience does.
Here we go.
Sure our audience does.
Chat. I'll let you respond. Go ahead and tell me how bad this person is and how bad the Democrats are messaging about this and what hill they want to die on while you ignore the fact that we're talking about due process. Go ahead. Tell everybody what the media has told you that is about, which I just had to correct you on because you didn't know, because you're an Australian, don't understand the facts. So again, go ahead and tell me how wrong I am. Go ahead and tell me I'm ready to hear your repeat talks about the Democrats and the repeat talks about how bad this person is and you want to die on this hill while ignoring due process. Go ahead. Speak.
Thank you. I have never said in any of our shows, in fact, I've said quite the opposite. I've never said that we should ignore due process. I think the Fourth Amendment is quite important. Okay. So I've never said that. What I previously stated was that my understanding was that he'd already been to court a couple of times and that he had a deportation order. Now, part of the reason why he wasn't supposed to be deported to El Salvador, the reason for that, as I understand it, was because a rival gang was threatening him or something along those lines. But that being said, regardless of the argument you're making, I'm just simply pointing out that if the Democrats want to make an international issue out of this, right, international enough for Katie Collins to actually ask about this in the White House meeting with the Salvadorian president, okay, perhaps they should pick somebody who is going to be more likely to be attractive to the American people. I don't think there are an awful lot of Americans that are particularly happy with the way the Democrats have misprioritized issues that have been facing the United States, and that shows up in the poll numbers. Okay, you've just gone through an election which has been bruising and brutal. There's books that have just come out recently, one of which is called "Fight the Wildest Race for the White House," where all of the things that you accuse people like myself of being conspiracy theorists about when it came to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris turned out to be true. And now you've got the Democrats in Congress with a 27% approval rating. Okay, that's like one of the lowest ratings ever recorded for the Democrats. Okay, and I'm simply pointing out, you're not going to listen, and that's perfectly fine, but I am simply pointing out that I don't think that this was a particularly good candidate to try to back, because I don't think it's going to endear the Democrats to very many people.
About the due process, and you've rambled on about some actual rating.
Because what you've done, Jacoby, as usual. What you have done as usual is you have misconstrued and misrepresented what I've said.
Chat, do you agree that people within the U.S., according to the Constitution, deserve due process? Yes
again,
or no?
Jacoby.
Yes or no?
Jacoby, you're not a lawyer. I'm not understand, so you don't get to dictate to me that I can only give you yes or no answers.
Because
okay? I gave you my answer
because he knows that he's wrong. It destroys his whole argument and makes
I don't even know why, Jacoby. I don't know why you're.
I gave you my answer before. I did say that I believe in due process.
Then we're
okay,
done
I've made that statement categorically. What you are doing is you have reversed what I've said in order to mislead the audience about what my position is. Okay, and you've been doing that for 5 years, and it's really transparent. Yeah, it's really transparent.
This case of Garcia is basically a big loser for the Trump administration. Okay, I'll tell you why. First of all, 9-0 decision, 9-0 with Alito, also against the Trump administration for how they handled this particular case. And of course, now they have another order. And the real problem is that the Trump administration has some very serious administrative problems relating to this individual who's a U.S. citizen. First of all, it's not only due process, it's notice and opportunity to be heard. There was no notice and opportunity to be heard before an administrative law judge, or frankly, any judge. You cannot pick people off the street and say,
was there or was there not a deportation order?
In 2011, which was dismissed a long time ago, and then escort him off to, where was it, El Salvador? It's called wrongful detainer, false imprisonment. His lawsuit against the U.S. government is going to be absolutely huge. And I don't see any path of victory for the Republicans on this. It's a big loser. And I did get to listen to, I wish Jacoby would be quiet because I wanted to listen to Shaquille to see what he was saying and what he heard and what the defenses are going to be. I've yet to see a legitimate legal defense.
Well, one of the things that we've been hearing over here.
So I'm on
one of the things we've been hearing here, and I don't know what you're saying in Spain, Nick, but what we've heard over here is that, and personally, I think this is a bit of a run around the Constitution, but this is what we're hearing has been done. This is how the administration's dealing with it. Is, okay, he shouldn't have been deported to El Salvador.
Right.
However, now that he has been, the remedy for that is not to bring him back to the United States, and he's not able to be brought back to the United States anyway because the US government has deemed him to be a member of MS-13, and Donald Trump has said that MS-13 is a terrorist organization. Now, look, this is going to play out in court, but what I'm saying is, whilst this will play out in court, there's lots of things that every administration does. It goes in front of the Supreme Court where they get ruled against, okay? I just think that this doesn't look great. It's not something that I think is going to improve the popularity of the Democrats to chase this particular thing. It's a bit like Bernie Sanders a few years ago jumping on stage in a debate and backing the idea of felons being able to vote again. Right now, I personally think that felons should be able to vote once they've served their sentence. But is that the hill you want to die on a debate stage?
So, Nick,
right? I just think it's strategically a bad idea. That's what I'm saying.
I want to listen to what you're saying because, see, the thing is, we can go to this particular sentence. You said the U.S. government, quote, deemed him to be illegal. The U.S. government can't deem anybody to be anything. They can make an accusation, but then they have to go to court and have a court of law, a judge, or a jury of his peers.
That's not true. But that's not true at all, Nick, because they make determinations about. They make negotiations about. Can you be quiet for a second, Toby, please?
The executive
they make accusations.
Not the jury, and the executive branch is not the executioner.
So Nick, hold on a second. The United States.
We're going to see if they're swatted down by
the United States makes
and other people. This is a big.
Hang on, hold up. The United States makes accusations all the time. The United States makes determinations all the time. They say ISIS and is a terrorist organization. Al Shabaab is a terrorist organization. They make those determinations all the time. They also make determinations about who foreign nationals, some of which have never been to the United States, as to which foreign nationals are in fact part of those organizations. There's no due process for them. The difference here is that this person was inside the United States at the time, and so therefore he is entitled to protections under the Constitution. And I don't disagree with Jacoby on that. He does deserve protections, but the question is, how do you remedy the situation? And I'm not sure that the guy has standing from El Salvador to petition the US government to force US government to bring him back to the country that he wasn't legally admitted to in the first place.
Yeah, well,
hold on a second.
I can tell you, it will make it more complicated.
Nick, hold on a second, because I was going to give you the. Hold on, I'll give you the background.
Okay, so Nick, we've got the situation in Australia and in the United Kingdom at the moment, right? Where previously conservative governments actually introduced rules during the conflict in Syria and Iraq, etc., where they said that citizens of Australia, citizens of the UK, who left the country to go and fight for what was determined to be terrorist organizations would not be allowed to return. Now, this has caused a lot of conflict. It's in the news quite a bit in Australia and the UK. In the UK at the moment, there's a young lady who, I'm not sure how old she is now, but I think she was 15 or something when she ran over there and married some guy and all that sort of stuff. And the UK is basically saying, well, you can't come back. And then other people in the UK say, well, she is actually a British citizen. She should come back, etc. This type of situation is not unique to the United States. Many countries in the West are dealing with this issue. And so, again, what I'm saying is that I don't think it endears Democrats and left-wing parties around the world when what they try to do is they try to make a saint out of somebody who would you like to live next door to this guy?
Nick,
Right.
what
So
I'm
I
hearing-
don't think strategically it's a good move for them.
You know,
Nick, quick question for you. From everything that I've heard no legal argument against it. I've heard a lot of play in the.
I haven't seen that either.
I've heard nothing.
I agree with you, Jacoby. This is a big winner for the liberals, big winner for the progressive wing, big loser for Trump.
But what are they going to win?
You strip somebody of due process, a notice, an opportunity to be heard. You strip people from constitutional rights. You basically stick your nose up at the Supreme Court of the United States. He's going to have over 1 million mad lawyers against him, and Trump is going to lose this big time.
And that's
but even if you're correct, but Nick, even if you're correct, even if he is able to successfully sue the U.S. government for breaching his civil, even if you're correct that he is successfully able to sue the U.S. government for breaching his civil rights, even if he's able to do that successfully, the result of that would be presumably a cash payout. It's not going to be a return to the United States. The U.S. government isn't going to bring him back because he didn't have legal right to be there in the first place, which it appears as though that's what is being argued for, that he should be returned. I don't think that that's going to be the case. And again, Katie Collins, I believe it was Katie Collins or somebody else in the press corps, who actually asked the Salvadorian president why he didn't bring the guy back.
Why do you want to defend this position, Shaquille?
I'm not defending any position. You asked me a question, and I'm answering the question, right, about what we've been told in Australia and what our understanding of the situation is. Okay, and I find it somewhat interesting to hear that apparently this guy has never been determined to be an MS-13 member. He's never been determined to be a terrorist or anything like that. When the press corps asked the Salvadorian president about it, the Salvadorian president actually said, by what right, I'm paraphrasing, by what right would I smuggle a terrorist back into the United States? So clearly, even at the highest levels of your government, this is the position that they have.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their position is. It matters the position of the United States Supreme Court, who said use all available means, which may even mean invading El Salvador and getting this person out. I'm serious. This is not a funny thing.
But how would you hang on? How would you do that? How can the United States infringe on El Salvador's sovereignty by saying what? Would you order Salvador to return the guy to the United States? Like, what would you do here? That's not how international relations work.
The hill that you
ask George Bush about international relations when he invaded Iraq.
You Democrats seem to love Cheney these days. So I mean, you ask your side.
Hold on.
Trump doesn't have the chutzpah to go get him out of El Salvador. Then he's showing his true colors, who he really is.
Yeah.
Why would he go down there to bring this guy back? The guy's not entitled to be there again.
All right, I'm going to interrupt. Time out. Let me tell you why, Shaq. Let me tell you why. Because he spent our freaking tax dollars to bring back 2 known pedophile sex traffickers from Romania that were detained there. Okay? So if he can do that for those criminals, then he can get off his butt and bring back home that daddy that he sent to his he kidnapped him, he human trafficked him. They all allowed it. And all I got to say is hell's going to freeze over real soon when it gets filled up with ice.
Yeah, but I still want to listen to it.
Once again, the difference is that he's got the right to bring people back from Romania who are U.S. citizens. This guy's not a U.S. citizen.
No, but
you guys are trying to argue with me about the morality of the situation, and I'm saying to you, that the legal remedy here is going to be monetary compensation. It's not going to be a return to the United States. There's nothing in the law that I'm aware of anywhere in the US that would require or give any court in the United States the right to order the executive to bring back a non-citizen to the United States as a remedy for an error that was made in deportation.
What you are missing again is the whole due process issue. That's where the problem is. And that is
I'm not missing I'm not missing that at all, Jacoby.
Yes, you are, because your argument is all emotional. There's nothing legal about what you're saying. Absolutely nothing. Nick has actually pointed that out to you. Nick has pointed that out to you multiple times. He wanted to hear a legal stance to defend what happened about him not receiving his due process or habeas corpus and all the other stuff. So he has not received that. He cannot be
because I'm not making that argument.
Chat. Yes, you are. He has not been deemed.
I'm not making the argument. You're asking me to defend an argument I haven't made.
Yes, you are.
Listen to what? Listen to what? You mischaracterized what I've said once again. You want me to listen to that rubbish for the next 6 minutes?
You said he's been deemed this, so therefore he cannot be. He was never proven in a court of law to be a MS-13 member. He has never been proven in a court of law to be a terrorist. He has never received his due process, or as Nick said, his right to be heard. So therefore, regardless, whatever Trump goes out there and says about this guy, he's never been proven in a court of law. And until that happens, he right now, it is a wrong, what is it called, Nick? Wrongful removal.
Wrongful detainer.
Yeah. So therefore,
okay. So you've said that, and I'm not disagreeing with you. In fact, I said that to you several times. I don't disagree with you.
Wait, real quick. I'm gonna ask you this question. Give me legal reason. I don't want to hear about this guy being bad. I don't want to hear about this and that and the other thing. Give me a legal reason why he should not receive his due process. If you cannot give me that, then he must be brought back to receive that due process.
That's not the argument that I've made. I don't know how many times I've got to say that to you. I'm not making the argument that his due process rights weren't violated. That's not the argument I made.
You didn't hear what I said.
I didn't hear what you said. Let
me clarify. Give me a legal reason why he cannot be brought back and given his due process.
Okay, I don't believe
that the judiciary has the right to order the executive to bring a non-citizen back. I don't think that they actually have that in the law. That doesn't mean that I agree that somebody's due process rights should be violated. Again, what I said to you was, if his due process rights had been violated, that would give him the option to sue the government for a breach of his civil rights. But I don't think he has the right to sue the government to allow him or to force the government to bring him back to a country that he actually had no legal right to be in the first place. I don't think that you can do that. That's my understanding. Now, if you think otherwise, please you tell me what the legal reason is.
All of you, everybody,
not only do I think otherwise, so does the United States Supreme Court. And I'll tell you what, this comes directly from the case Nome versus Alberto Garcia. It goes this: the only argument the government offers in support of its request is that they can't grant relief once a deportee crosses the border is plainly wrong. And then they cite two cases, Rumsfeld versus Padilla and also Bonamine versus Bush. The government's argument implies it could deport and incarcerate any person, including U.S. citizens, without legal consequence, so long as it does so before a court can intervene. So the Supreme Court says, no, this is not true. Yes, he's deported, but no, he still has rights. And they went on further. They agree the court order is to provide Alberto Garcia with all process he'd been entitled to had he not been unlawfully moved to El Salvador. Means the government must comply with the obligation to provide him with due process of law, including it must also comply with the obligations under the Convention Against Torture. And then, so there's
in that particular case, in the Bush case that you brought up, if memory serves me correctly, that was a case that dealt with the incarceration of people at Guantanamo Bay. In relation to how that would apply here, that would only allow him to have due process to have his migration status adjudicated. That's all that would do. Again, I don't think, and look, I might be wrong, that's perfectly fine, but I don't think there's any provision in the law that would actually allow the Supreme Court or any other court to order the executive to bring him back. I don't think that's a remedy that's currently on the books. Now, this might change.
Again,
this might change the law.
Shaq,
I don't know.
Shaq,
But to be very clear to our audience, the argument that Jatovy is saying that I am making is not the argument I'm making. I am not saying that he doesn't deserve due process. I've not said that. I've not said that once today. I've never said that. Everybody deserves due process. And I argue for that around the world, that the Fourth Amendment is something that should be implemented in other countries.
So again, so we agree on the due process. Thank you. That is so you agree with the Democrats on that. On top of that, Nick did point out earlier that in your comments that you did not provide any legal recourse or any information there to defend that. So again, like I said, we're on that due process
because
side.
That's not the argument I'm making.
Also, real quick, just to point out, Nick did also point out that you were wrong, because really the way this case is being played out right now, this is why the Trump administration is not going to court, because as Nick pointed out, it's a loser. This is why the Democrats are fighting for due process, because it is for everybody in the country, as you agree with. That is the hill that they are dying on, not on if this guy is a good guy or a bad guy. So again, you agree with the hill. So there you go.
No. All I said to you was, I don't think that this particular hill is a great strategic move for the Democrats. That's all I've said. Now look, you'll defend the Democrats no matter what. No matter what, right? Now there is books coming out showing what was going on behind the scenes that the rest of us can see in relation to Biden, and you don't want to admit it, right? Because you never can, because you are incapable of ever responding to even the smallest ounce of criticism of your side of politics.
It's a good day today, Mark.
We've got another show to go to.
He's on top of that hill too. Due process.
We got another show to go to.
Mark is on mute. You're still on mute, Mark. I can't hear you at all. I got a dog barking in the background. Mark is saying some words. I don't know what Mark is saying because he's on mute. Still can't hear you, Mark. You still got the cute, cuddly face. That's okay, Mark.
That's it. I was just wrapping up this show, and there I go. I did not know I was on mute, because I was trying to. They might have put me on mute, but I was just going to what Shaquille was saying earlier and everything. Say that in 2019, because he had actually come here to escape gang violence and everything, and he was illegal at the time, but he was granted so technically he does have status, because he was granted what they call withholding of removal status, a rare alternative to asylum due to the dangers from gang violence if he returned to El Salvador. So that status allowed him to live and work legally in the United States. So in that sense, even though it's a special status, he was a legal citizen. At the time of his time of deportation, he was living in Maryland with his wife and children, who were all American citizens, and was compliant, as you said earlier, with that annual check-in that he had to do with ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So he was following what he's supposed to do, and he had a special status, which is what I was trying to bring to Shaquille's attention. So he does have technically legal status. It's just a different kind of legal status. So that's what I'm trying to bring to his eyes and everything like that. And on that note,
that wouldn't have mattered, because even Nick brought up different cases, and it was like, oh, that's not true. That's not true. It doesn't apply here. It wouldn't have mattered. That's what's going on in the country. That's the whole. If you back Trump, you back Trump fully, regardless whatever he does, even though if it goes against the law. Hey, it's good for me. That's the way it's wild to me that happens. But yeah,
that's that is. And everything like that. But we're going to get on out of here. I think they got Economics Monday. I don't know if you have that link, but I'll go pop it on over there and everything like that. And then they got media at noon. So that's what we got going on Easter Monday.
All right. Put the link in the chat. I'll jump over there.
I'll put the link in the chat. Let me end the show, and I'll put the link in the chat.